This is Mindful Morsels by Sam H. Lee, helping you do more with less. Earlier this year, I, like many people who are vaguely interested in AI or podcasting, was really impressed with the capabilities of Google's NotebookLM. It was a software that not only allowed users to upload documents to create summaries, briefing docs, table of contents, but there was another step or addition to it where you could actually create an AI generated conversation between two people discussing whatever you were uploading. So let's say if you were a student and you were uploading information about a history paper you had to write, you upload all of your notes, you hit the generate button for the conversation tool, and within a few minutes, there would be a conversation length dependent on how much information there is between this human male voice and human female voice through AI that basically creates a podcast episode about your notes. And this is not in any way robotic either. I remember when I was playing around with it, the AI was pretty spot on with creating the inflection tones, the way humans speak, and it clearly was trying its best with all of its knowledge to create as organic of a conversation as possible. It felt like another true step in terms of AI's accessibility to non-engineers or people who just don't always work with AI. And we have already had about 2 years of mainstream ChatGPT when it became widely accessible, and I would argue until now AI tools have primarily been text-based for most everyday users. And as a podcast producer, when I first heard NotebookLM's voices, I wasn't exactly threatened, but more so contemplative. It's just remarkable, first of all, that such technology exists. But it raises several important questions as well, and the one I wanted to focus on today was, do listeners actually prefer synthetic voices to human ones? And I was curious to see how I could tackle it. So here is my quite simple thought process. First, center everything around that key question, and my hypothesis was that the preference likely depends on the listener's purpose. So taking NotebookLM specifically, its current capabilities are limited to converting the existing information that the user uploads into an audio format without necessarily adding any original insights. And that could be useful for personal research consumption or simple entertainment. It's not exactly ideal for wider distribution. In fact, when I tried to download the audio that was generated from one of my NotebookLM research banks, it wouldn't download the audio, it just downloaded a blank file. Maybe that has just been a glitch in my experience, but that hammers down the point that currently there might be some trouble with distributing this audio to mass audiences in the first place. In contrast, human-made podcasts, even those aided by AI, are usually crafted for specific audiences and are ideally offering new perspectives. So that was my hypothesis, that the preference between synthetic voices and human voices are probably just dependent on the listener's purpose. The next step would be to actually research, and I was thinking if I should use Google or something like ChatGPT. My decision was I chose Google and then ChatGPT, so we basically ended up using both. Third, I wanted to look into NotebookLM's specific capabilities with a bit of a closer eye, and then finally just form a conclusion. So that's hypothesis, research, NotebookLM research, and then forming a conclusion. With Googling, the first article that popped up was actually by a service called Beyond Words that makes AI-generated audio. And this was the first thing that popped up when I just put in the question, do people prefer to listen to human voice podcasts versus synthetic voice podcasts? And this article about human versus AI audio broke it down more so in a logistical and resource perspective versus if people actually wanted to listen to it or not. And then the third search result was Reddit, which seems to be more and more people's go-to for information gathering. and this is in the r/singularity channel. And the heading is Google's NotebookLM new podcast function has the best voices I've ever heard. It actually feels like listening to a podcast. And I was going through that discussion for a while, and it seems that, again, depending on the purpose of why people would use NotebookLM to create this type of podcast, that would influence whether they were continuing to do it or if that was just a one-time thing or not. The next step was to consult ChatGPT, and I put in the same question of, do people prefer to listen to human voice podcasts versus synthetic voice podcasts? And according to the always reliable ChatGPT, apparently studies and surveys consistently show that most podcast listeners prefer human voice podcasts over synthetic voice ones. And the factors listed included emotional connection and authenticity, trust and credibility, listening experience, podcast genre considerations, and cultural and accessibility factors. These factors didn't really surprise me, and I think the one I honed in most on was the podcast genre considerations. I think it's quite rare for people just to be fishing around for any type of podcast. I feel like the people I have met and the way I choose podcasts are usually through specific reasons. Like if you want to listen to news podcasts, you have your certain maybe New York Times or Free Press or Wall Street Journal podcasts you listen to. If you want to listen to tech podcasts, maybe you'll listen to Wired's podcast or Hard Fork. If you want Bachelor podcasts, the reality show, then there are specific Bachelor podcasts. I think that will definitely continue to play a key role in deciding whether people actually do prefer synthetic podcasts over human podcasts. It'll be based on what they're trying to get out of listening to the podcast. Next, I looked into NotebookLM's specific capabilities, and I realized there was a distinction between NotebookLM and NotebookLM Plus. Essentially, NotebookLM, the standard model, is built with Gemini, which is Google's AI, and you can upload PDFs, websites, Google Docs, slides, YouTube URLs, and more. I think up to 50 for one research page, and then you can create one-click summaries, FAQs, timelines from that, generate the audio overviews, and you can ask questions as a conversation, similar to ChatGPT. And then with NotebookLM Plus, I think you could just have a lot more customization. That's more for teams who might be using it, and that is what is included in the Plus features. Specifically for NotebookLM, it's described on the website as an AI-powered research assistant that can help you get to critical insights faster and easier, all grounded in the information you provide. So that's different from trying to create a synthetic podcast for a wider audience. But again, based on what I have seen, it just seems that NotebookLM's version of the synthetic podcast has really made a mark so far in the general discourse and culture spaces around this topic. So what's the conclusion? I think it still means it depends. If you are looking for a specific guide for your research or information, probably a synthetic voice podcast is going to be more reflective of what specifically you're looking for. But I think still, if you're looking for podcasts to listen to as you go to work or you commute or you do something that's not work related, I think human-made podcasts still have a role. But this is definitely not an easy question to answer, and I want to continue diving into this and almost make it a series. Well, not almost, it's going to be a series. So if you're interested, please follow along, and we will see what part of this question we want to tackle next time. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Mindful Morsels by Sam H. Lee. I hope you found some Notion tip, budgeting advice, or other insight helpful to make your life slightly less stressful. If you want to see or hear more of Mindful Morsels, feel free to like and subscribe on Substack, where you can find me by searching Mindful Morsels by Sam H. Lee, and also on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If you'd like to have some input on episode ideas, feel free to vote in polls I put out on my YouTube channel, and that handle is Sam H. Lee. Until next time, I'll see you then.